Good afternoon. How you guys doing? Are you awake? Are you asleep? Are you after having lunch? Did you guys just come from lunch? Okay. So I hope you guys aren't too sleepy here. We'll try to keep you guys awake and going throughout the day here and throughout our time together. My name is Walter Augustine, and I am from here, Biola University, and work in our financial aid department. And we were just talking, I work in financial aid, but I'm also working on my PhD right now, in the middle of my dissertation, working on issues of economic ethics and theology, as well as Christology at this time. So I'm glad to be with you guys here today. Glad to see you all here with us for our session today, From Barriers to Bridges, Identifying and Overcoming Privilege. As you guys know, the theme for the conference is Shalom. And shalom is a big concept, as you've been learning, I'm sure, that it's more than just the absence of war. But as a professor from Yale, Nicholas Walter Storff, put it, shalom is right relationships. It is right relationships, just relationships. So it's right relationship with God vertically. It's right relationship with those around you horizontally, and then it's right relationship with your environment as well. So as we talk about the concept of shalom throughout this conference, it's a great concept, it's a great idea, but I think that we all recognize and know that the reality is we are not living in a shalom world today. That our world is not one that has right relationships or just relationships with one another, with God, or with our environment. And that there are a number of barriers to shalom. There are a number of things that will keep us from moving towards shalom. So the purpose of what we're doing today is we just want to look at one particular barrier, and that barrier is the barrier of privilege. So as we get started, and this is going to be a little bit interactive, and we're going to be doing some things here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of where we're going. I just want to start off by asking you guys this question. What is privilege? What is privilege? When you think of that term privilege, what comes to your mind? Any thoughts from you guys? Any ideas?
Opportunity.
Opportunity. Okay. Good. Any other thoughts?
If you have it, you don't see it. Because you think it's a norm.
Okay. Okay. So it's a certain type of norm that you don't recognize many times that you have, right? It's sort of invisible to you. But it may be visible to others because they don't have what you have. Is that basically what you're saying? But for you, it's the norm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Any other thoughts on what privilege might be? Yes.
A system of advantage based off of something, whether it be race, gender, education. Okay,
great. A system of advantage. So as you're talking about, it's systemic in nature many times, right? It's structural in nature, and it's an advantage based on many of the different social constructs that we may have: race, gender. It could be class. It could be a number of different things, right? So good. Anybody else? Well, I want to share with you real quickly. There's a book that was written by two Catholic lay people, and this book was called Interrupting White Privilege. And they gave these definitions of privilege, and so let me share those with you. They say that privilege is all the benefits that come simply from the fact of one's race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc., etc. Another definition that they gave from Peggy McIntosh was an unearned advantage and conferred dominance. An unearned advantage and conferred dominance. And then the final thing that we see here, which is interesting, as we talk about it, and this was expressed earlier, the concept of privilege can come in many different forms based upon our social constructs. So it can be based on race, it can be based on gender, it might be based on your socioeconomic status, it can be based on class. Can anybody think of anything else that people might look at as being privileged? Any other arenas that might be privileged?
Maybe in athletics.
Athletics, right? I mean, we privilege athletics and people who are athletic in our country, as well as entertainers as well, right? So people who are gifted athletically and as well as in talent and entertainment. True, good. I thought I saw some hands maybe over this way. Did I? No? In the back?
Like age?
Age, yeah. Certain societies, age is privilege. Exactly. If you're, depending on the society, if you're younger, you're ignored. You're not worth as much as those who are older. So age can be privilege. What about education? Can education level be privilege? Somebody who's educated versus somebody who's not as educated or is uneducated? What about religion? Can religion be a form of privilege? Yes, we see that in countries all the time, that religion can be used as a form of privilege. So basically, it's all the benefits that come simply from the fact of one's race, gender, socioeconomic status, and so many other areas that can confer privilege. And the basic concept is that of the unearned advantage and conferred dominance. The last thing that you see on this slide is that various types of privilege often intersect, but are not interchangeable. In other words, racial and gender privilege can coexist, but racial and gender privilege are not the same thing. You know, it's interesting, a person can be privileged in one area and not privileged in another area at the same time. So you can actually be privileged in one area, one type, but unprivileged in another area. Can I give you a quick example of what I'm talking about? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had this story that he used to tell, and it was a well-known story where he was talking about the fact that he was in jail. And as he's in jail, he says he likes to converse with his guards. And so he's down south and he's in jail and his guards are mostly white. And as he's conversing with his white guards and talking to them about what they're trying to do, Dr. King asked the guard, he said, "How much do you earn?" And the guard told him how much he earned. And Dr. King said to him, "Well, man, based on what you earn, you don't need to be out there guarding me. Instead, you need to be out there marching with me." Because Dr. King understood that what that man earned was the same thing that he and others from the African American race were earning. And so he essentially said to the man, yes, you might be privileged in our culture because of race, but when it comes to economics, you're in the same boat as I am. And because Dr. King was not just interested in issues of race, but also economics and poverty, he also said, look, you need to be out there marching with me. This jailer was both privileged in one sense and unprivileged in another sense at the same time. So this is a basic concept of privilege that we have and that we're going to be looking at today. So let's do this. Let's take a moment here, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to go ahead, turn around to one or two people. It can be somebody next to you, it can be somebody behind you. And I want you to just think about, as we talk about this definition of privilege, as you think about the definition of privilege, I want you guys just to talk about for a brief second one way in which you are privileged. Can you think of at least one way in which you are privileged? So why don't you go ahead, you can turn to somebody next to you, somebody behind you, and just talk with one another and just exchange one way in which you are privileged. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to talk and share a little bit about at least one way in which you might be privileged. Let me start off by asking this question. Is there anyone here, as you were thinking about privilege and discussing privilege, is there anyone here that found that they are not privileged at all, that they couldn't think of at least one way in which they're not privileged? Anyone? No. Okay. So basically, are we saying basically that everyone here has at least one form of privilege? Yeah. Would you guys agree with that? Okay. All right. I think I would agree with that too. I think I would agree with that. What were some of the things, as you thought about it, just out of curiosity, what were some of the things that came up and when you thought about one way in which you're privileged? Just anybody.
Education.
Education. Good. Yes.
Just living in America.
Just living in
have
America?
freedom.
Yes.
To express your religion.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. That's a privilege. That's good.
I was not gonna say this, but like having a precedent set, like through my family, like
Mm-hmm.
education, jobs, all of that.
Yeah, that's good. So that heritage, that family heritage in a sense. Good. Good. Cool. Let's have one more. Is there one more that wants to share in terms of privilege? Yes.
I'll say I'm graduating in May, so education, but I'm also graduating debt-free.
Wow. Oh, that's great. Congratulations. Yes. That deserves an applause on that one. That is great. Yes, that is a privilege. That is great. Good, good. Well, good. Well, it sounds like you guys had some good, fruitful conversation and were able to identify, even within yourselves, just different ways that you are privileged. But then also we need to recognize that sometimes privilege can be a barrier. Privilege can be a hindrance to moving towards shalom. And so we want to take a look at how might privilege be a barrier to shalom? How might privilege be a barrier to shalom? In order to illustrate one of the ways that privilege might be a barrier, I need 10 brave souls. Do I have 10 brave souls? All right. Come on up. Come on up. And if you could bring a chair with you. I need you to bring one chair with you. Make sure, is my numbering right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Come on up. Great. Come on up. Perfect. Come on up. I need 10 brave souls. I think we need one more chair also. I'm going to move this to the side. If you could just put that down there. Put that down there. Perfect. Yep, sit in any chair. All right, do we have 10 chairs or do we need one more? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Cool, perfect. You got it? All right. Are we missing one person? Do we need one more? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, one break. There you go. All right. Give my man a hand as he comes on up. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're just going to show just one example, one way in which privilege could be a barrier to shalom. And some of you may have seen this before. Some of you may have gone through this before. But essentially, what you guys represent, each of you represents the human population, the total human population, okay? So the 10 of you together is 100% of the human population. The chairs in which you sit represent the total wealth of the human population, the 100% complete wealth of the human population. Now, let's think about this for a second. Would you guys, if you think about wealth in our society, do you think that each person owns 10% of the wealth of the population? No. There's actually privilege, is there not, when it comes to wealth? So we need to do some rearranging up here a little bit, all right? Let's see. I need you guys to get up. And here's what we're going to do. Can you guys all move down this way, please? Come around, come around, come around. You stay there. The rest of you come around. Okay. Now, the reality of things in our society, okay, and this is in the world in general, is that the top 1% of the population owns 46% of the world's wealth globally. So that means you need to take 4 chairs. Those all belong to you. There you go. Feel free. They're all yours. You can lay out. There you go. That's pretty good, isn't it? Nice, comfortable. But now let's make this. Let's narrow this down. I'm going to sort of mix metaphors a little bit, if you guys don't mind, because we're talking about global wealth, okay? And that the top 1% own 46% of the global wealth. But when you narrow it down to the United States alone, within the United States, and I'm using 2005 numbers here, so it's a little bit dated, forgive me. But when you look at the wealth in the United States, the top 10% in the United States own 71% of the wealth.
Not that tall.
So, but nevertheless, you need to gather 3 more chairs around you somehow. Maybe make them in a little circle in front of you or something like that. You can put your feet up.
I like this demonstration.
All right, there you go. Congratulations. Enjoy. Now, so there we go. So top 10% in the United States own 71% of the wealth. All right. So now let's look at this. Let's look at things by race for a quick second. In the United States, based on race and wealth, those who are Caucasian, white wealth, and wealth, by the way, is the amount that you own minus the amount that you owe. Okay, how much assets you have? Yes, I heard an ooh back there. How much you have in assets versus how much you have in debt. All right, so that's what wealth is, your net worth. So when you look at the United States from a race standpoint, white wealth, in terms of Caucasian wealth, tends to be 13 times more on average than African American wealth. Okay? So what we need to do now, why don't you go ahead, why don't you take that chair? Break it down a little bit more. At the same time, by the way, Caucasian unemployment is approximately 30% less than Latino unemployment and 50% less than African American unemployment, thus feeding into the wealth issue. And then finally, typically in our society, let's break it down by gender. In our society, women tend to earn, on average, only 80% of what men earn. Ladies, you tend to earn only about 80% of what men earn. So now we're left with 2 chairs, right? Guys, they're all yours. Feel free to, I mean, everybody, come on over. Let's fit in can you guys fit? No? No.
Let's try it.
So let's take a look at this, right? We've got privilege taking place economically in our society, right? Let me start over here. How does it make all of you guys feel to be here sort of standing, trying to find a chair, but knowing there aren't that many chairs for you to get? How does that make you feel? Sad? Sad, okay. Okay, yeah, pretty bad, right?
Just make you aware, like, how it is in real life, whatever.
Yeah, makes you aware of how it is.
An eye-opener.
Good.
Puts it into perspective.
Puts it in his perspective. Good. What do you think about him?
I wonder,
Get all the chairs.
How does he get all the chairs?
Why?
Yeah.
can I have one?
Interesting question, right? Why can't I have one of those chairs? Okay, good.
It makes me wonder if, like, he knows, like, that he has all the chairs. I mean, like, obviously you know you have the chairs. But, like, if they weren't chairs, like, does he know?
Yeah,
Like, where am I? Like, do I know where I am?
Yeah.
How does that relate to me?
that's a really good question, right? Is he even aware on some levels of the disparity between himself and you and where you are, right? Good questions, good questions. How does it make you feel down there to have all the chairs? And
A little bad.
a little bad, okay.
I mean, I guess not fair, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess it depends on how I got the chairs.
Okay, depends on how you got the chairs.
Like,
All right,
You know, like, did I start off there and then get the chairs, or did I just get given the chairs?
okay. That's a good question. So you think it would be different if you started off without the chairs and then you got the
I
chairs?
started out standing up and then I got 7 chairs, or if I was just born in with 7 chairs.
Okay. So how would it be different? Let's say that you started off with no chairs and you, let's say, earned 7 chairs.
I think I'd be much more aware of how many chairs I had
Okay.
than if you were just given the chairs. You don't know, you're not as aware of why you have that many or what they're for, really.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. How would it make you feel about everybody else that's here?
Which, if I
If
started there,
you had started there.
I'd want to help. I'd want
Okay.
to give them chairs.
Okay. Okay.
I guess if I was given the chairs, I wouldn't feel as inclined to give them chairs. I'd just tell them to work harder and get where I am, even though I didn't work,
Okay.
I guess.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Good. How do you feel in the middle?
I'm just hanging out.
You just hanging. Okay. You're comfortable, right? You're just sort of chilling, right? Just relaxing. So, cool. Well, guys, thank you. Let's give our folks a hand here. Thank you very much. You can come on back. Make sure you grab your chair. You don't have to grab all the chairs. Just make sure you have a chair so you can sit down. I just wanted to be able to, yeah, you guys do your chair. Make sure you grab them. I just wanted to give you one example of a way in which privilege can become a barrier. Oops, sorry, I'm about to run you over here. Sorry, that's not good. But yeah, just wanted to give you guys one example of how privilege can be a barrier to shalom. And of course, that's, it's not a perfect example, but it gives you an idea, a picture of one way that privilege, and in this case, specifically economic privilege, might be a barrier to shalom. It was interesting, just some of the comments that you guys shared, just the whole thought of, man, does he realize what's going on here? Is he aware? And just some of your comments of, well, you think that possibly if it was inherited or just given to you as opposed to you earning it, that your mindset might be different. If it was just inherited, if you, let's say, received a trust fund or something of that nature, that you might not even be aware of what's going on down here, may not care about it, right? Now, it's interesting, the other side, of course, there are some people who do earn it, start off with nothing, and end up with a lot, and then they look back at everyone else, and they say, well, it's not my fault that you don't have it. You should do the same thing I did. And so there are various viewpoints from that side of the room, right? But whichever way you look at it, you see that there are barriers that are erected, right, towards shalom. Even relationally, right? You live in the upper end 7-chair penthouse suite area, whereas everybody else is down here scrambling, right, to get their apartment or whatever it may be. You guys don't even live in the same worlds. Relationally, there's a barrier there that may keep the two of you apart. So we see just one example of how privilege might be a barrier to shalom. Let me show you one other one real quickly. And this is from a book that was called Justice in an Unjust World, written by a professor named Karen Labax from Pacific Lutheran. And she uses a story, it's really a quote from a peasant, a Latin American peasant farmer. And essentially, this Latin American peasant farmer talks about this concept of barriers to shalom being similar, and talking about privilege being similar to birds and fish. Birds and fish. This is what he said. Let me show you. He said, you live in the world of the birds of the air, and we in that of the fishes of the sea. Birds move fast because they fly. But when we fishes move, we move relatively slower because we have to swim in an ocean of usury, which is high interest rates. In other words, when they have to borrow and in order to be able to plant, then they have to pay back high interest rates on that which they're borrowing in terms of feed. Tenancy, they don't own the land that they are working on. Somebody else owns it, and so they have to pay rent on the land that they're farming, and other unjust forces. And then he says, very few of the birds will come into our world and see the reality of our problems from our point of view. In other words, this gentleman is saying that privilege, and in his situation, again, this is an example of economic privilege, has caused a barrier to shalom, a barrier in relationship, a barrier in abilities to be able to earn a living. Many different types of barriers have been constructed as a result of privilege in this situation. Let me stop there. And before we go any further, let me just ask, do you guys have any questions or thoughts on what we've covered so far? Anything? No? Everything makes sense so far in terms of what we're talking about? Okay, sounds good. Well, here's what we're going to do at this point then. Since we've gotten a basic understanding of the concept of privilege, what privilege is, the many different types of privilege, the fact that there are intersections of privilege, so that in one sense you can be privileged in one sense at one time, but not privileged in another sense at the same time. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn our attention to the passage in John chapter 4, verses 1 through 29. We've got a handout for you in case you didn't bring your Bible that has that passage. Because at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to ask if you would just go ahead and we're going to do a little bit of Bible study together. And we're going to take a look at this passage of John chapter 4, verses 1 through 29. And we want to take a look at this concept of privilege. We're going to take a look at the concept of privilege. So remember the groups that you guys were in before? I want you to go ahead, turn back, and get into those groups again, because we're going to work together as groups. Or if you guys want to go ahead and construct new groups, that's fine too, however you want to do it. All right. So does everybody have a group? Let me give you your assignment. Here's your assignment. I want you to go ahead and read together John 4, 1 through 29. And then I want you to discuss 3 questions as a group. Number 1, what are the types of privilege that you see occurring in this passage? John chapter 4, verses 1 through 29. Number 2, how might those privileges, be a barrier to shalom? How might those privileges be a barrier to shalom? And then the final question is was Jesus privileged? Was Jesus privileged? So we're going to go ahead and probably give you guys about 15, 20 minutes just to go ahead, read through the passage, and then discuss these 3 questions and your thoughts on them. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, why don't we go ahead and come back together? Did you guys have enough time to discuss everything? Everybody have enough time to? I'm sure there's much more you could be discussing together, I'm sure. But just wanted to give us a little bit of a taste of this passage. So let's just real quick look at a quick overview of the passage before we jump into what you guys found. Again, this is a passage, Jesus and a Samaritan woman. And of course, Jesus and disciples are passing through Samaria. And Jesus is exhausted. I mean, the scriptures talk about him just being very tired. So the disciples leave him resting by the well while they go to town to get food. And as he's there by the well, around the 6th hour, it says, around noon, a Samaritan woman comes to the well to get water. And Jesus asks her for a drink, which starts a conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, this woman returns to her town and she tells others about her conversation with Jesus. So that's just sort of an overview of that part of the passage. We know that there's more that comes after that she goes back. She tells the townsfolk come out to the well to meet Jesus. And then when they meet Jesus, then they say, well, now we don't just rely on her testimony, but we know for ourselves that this is truly the Messiah. And then they invite Jesus back into the town along with the disciples to be with them. So as we now have a good idea of the concept of the passage and what was going on, let's talk a little bit about what you guys found as we were going through. And so let's start with the first question. And I would like to hear at least from one person from every group as we go through, just to hear a little bit about what you guys found. So let's go back and let's take a look at the first question. What are the types of privilege that you see occurring in this passage? I see it. Let me start there in the middle, and then we come up to the front. Go ahead.
Gender.
Gender.
Was a privilege, like Jesus was a man when she was a woman, and women didn't have much, and they couldn't speak to men, and there was a lot of boundaries being a woman, but there was a lot of advantages being a man. So.
Yes. Very good. Very good. Matter of fact, just real quickly, it's interesting, just as I was researching some of this, there were rabbis who basically said, Jewish rabbis who said that a man was not allowed to speak to a woman in public. A husband could not speak to his wife, a brother could not speak to her sister in public because it was inappropriate to speak to a woman. And then many of you have probably heard, and it was in the description of one of the sessions here, that there was a prayer that Jewish males prayed. And that prayer said, Lord, thank you for not making me a Gentile, a woman, or a slave. So you're right, there was gender privilege that was taking place within that culture. Very good, very good. Do we have another one? Or was it? Go ahead.
Being able to travel.
Being able to travel.
They were traveling.
Yeah, yeah, being able to travel. Now that's an interesting privilege too, because the fact that they were traveling, number one, if you understand the culture, they lived under Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, which made it easier for them to be able to travel about, which was an interesting time in which they lived. But also just the fact, yeah, they were traveling. We're going to come back to the fact that they were able to travel. Specifically, we want to look at the fact that they were able to travel into Samaria. That's an interesting piece. So good point, good point. Yes?
We were looking at like religious privilege. I was saying for Jews do not associate with Samaritans, and like how it was saying that the Jews claim the place where they must worship is in Jerusalem.
Yes.
It's almost like the Jews had the privilege of worshiping in Jerusalem, but the Samaritans weren't allowed there because they didn't associate.
Mm-hmm.
They had been pushed out.
Yeah.
So just like that religious privilege, that like animosity there.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Religious privilege, right? And it's a religious privilege from a Jewish standpoint, Jews over Samaritans, right? That type of thing going on. And we're going to come back to that as well, but that's a good point. Good to point out. Anybody? Go ahead, yes.
I'll say that's also cultural as well.
Yes.
That Jews and Samaritans did not associate with one another. That Jews would often go all the way around Samaria just to avoid interaction with them.
Yes.
And to not it was to them almost like becoming impure just to interact.
Yes.
With these Samaritans.
Yes, thank you. Yes, perfect. It's not just religious in nature, but cultural in nature as well. They don't like one another, right? They really can't stand each other in many ways. So, yes, good. And that's interesting, by the way, that you point out just real quickly that they go around Samaria. In other words, they purposefully go out of their way, literally, geographically, to avoid that group of people, right? So that's a very good point, very interesting point. Any others? Yes.
It's the same concept, but it's like ethnic privilege because the Samaritans were people that were mixed or biracial or multiracial.
Yes.
With Jews and other things, and they were pushed out because they weren't like fully Jewish.
Yes, very good. Can I ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you don't mind, as a follow-up to that, the beginnings of the Samaritans, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Do you know a little bit about that? Or
I just know that, like, I don't know all of it, but I just knew that it was like the people who if Jewish people like were to create people who were mixed and not like Jewish or have like what the Samaritans are, or they were called the Samaritans after, like it's a group of people that are biracial or multiracial with Jewish and some other ethnicity.
Yes.
I don't know the other one.
Yes. No, that's good. That's good. Did you want to jump in?
With the Assyrian nation, with the other tribes, they got spread out and they intermixed, and then with the other two tribes got taken to Babylon.
That's exactly it. When you,
They intermixed, and then they weren't pure anymore.
That's it. That's exactly it. I was going to say, and thank you guys, both of you, for just elaborating on that. When you get home, if you get a chance, read 2 Kings 17, because that elaborates on the beginning of the group that we see here called the Samaritans. Essentially what happened in that situation, if you remember, there were two kingdoms, right? You originally had the one kingdom of Israel, and it split into the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. Well, in 2 Kings 17, we see the Assyrians coming in to the northern kingdom of Israel and sacking it and taking everybody off into slavery. But what they did, what the king at the time, Sennacherib, did was not only did he remove the Jews that were living in the northern kingdom of Israel and take them away into slavery, but then he took people that he had, how can I put it, taken out of their native lands from elsewhere, and he put them in Israel. So people who were non-Jewish, he relocated into the northern kingdom of Israel. And it's a fascinating read because if you read it, you find that these people go in there, they start worshiping their own gods, and the God of Israel gets angry and he sends lions to start devouring them. And as a result of that, they complain and they go back to Sennacherib and they say, look, we can't live here. We don't know what the God of this land wants. And so Sennacherib said, okay, well, I'll send a few Jews back to be able to go along with you into the northern kingdom so you can learn how you should worship the Lord of that area properly. That is the beginnings of the Samaritan people that we see in John chapter 4. So it's really interesting. It's a people that was created by forced relocation and forced intermixing. Interesting piece. Very good, very good. Any other pieces of privilege? Any other privileges that you see? Yes.
There's a privilege with marriage.
Huh. Yeah.
She didn't have a husband, well, she had 5 husbands. She had 5 husbands, and now she didn't have.
Yeah. Good, good. Sort of a marriage privilege, right? Sort of a preference in terms of marriage. By the way, and it's interesting, not only was there a preference in terms of marriage, and I'm glad you pointed this out. Again, remember we were talking about the rabbis and the rabbis' rules? And this gets into another type of privilege, but we'll go ahead and talk about it here. Rabbis said that if a woman was married more than 2 times, then she was immoral. She was unclean. There were a few rabbis who would allow a woman to be married 3 times. But generally, more than 2 times, that woman was considered immoral and unclean in that society. So you're right. So that's good as you talk about marriage and the whole thing there. So thank you. Any others? Yes.
It talks about how Jesus is gaining basically popularity and more disciples, and he has disciples who can go out and get food for him.
Mm-hmm.
He's baptizing more people, and he's becoming well known.
Yeah.
Whereas the woman is most likely cast out and not in a community with people, and she's not married and things of. So Jesus is like, his popularity is more bigger.
Interesting. So almost a social privilege there, right? If we were thinking about today's society, Jesus would have a lot more friends on Facebook than the woman at the well would. I mean, essentially, right? I mean, the woman at the well, and we'll come back to that, but that's an excellent point. Why, and we'll think about this, why is she coming to draw water at noon, the hottest time of the day, as opposed to in the morning when everybody else might go draw water? I saw a hand, just real quickly, let me catch this hand in the back, and we're going to come back and talk about that a little bit more, but go ahead. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal your thunder there. But did you want to elaborate or say anything else on that, or?
Well, no, I was just gonna say that there was like the lack of privilege for her because she had to come during the day. And then also, I think the two of like the marriage and that go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Because she was married 5 times, but in this time, women weren't allowed to divorce their husbands. So
Thank
she was
you.
either divorced or widowed.
Yes.
And so she was basically considered like, it doesn't say technically she was considered like a whore or anything.
Right.
But like people looked at her like that because she had 5 husbands. Now
Yes.
she's living with a man that she wasn't even married to. But it could have been just because nobody wanted her and she had to have do sexual things with him in order to survive, have food, have a place to live.
Yes. Thank you. That is excellent. I'm glad you brought that out because actually what you just brought out is a couple of things. Number one, as you were saying, the religious moral privilege that was in that society, according to Jewish law, women could not divorce men. Men could divorce women, but women could not divorce men. Okay. Matter of fact, remember Jesus actually came against that as he was talking in Matthew 5, because he was talking about the fact that the only reason that you should divorce is for reasons of sexual immorality within a relationship. But he said otherwise, you should not divorce. Why? Because there were situations where men were going and saying, my wife burnt the food, I want a writ of divorce. Or she's not pretty to me anymore, I want a writ of divorce. They were divorcing for any reason that they wanted to. So that's an excellent point. But then you brought out another privilege, even in your comment, which I thought was interesting, which is economic privilege. Economic privilege. The fact that a woman in that society had to depend upon a man in order to be able to survive for the most part. So when we see her having 5 husbands, part of that, as you were saying, is probably her saying, look, I need to survive. And in order to survive economically, in order to have food, a place to stay, clothes on my back, everything else, I need to be able to have somebody with me. I need a man. So we see that situation going on too. Very good. Yes. Go ahead.
I feel like also like her getting water at noon, like you were saying, like most of the time they go in the morning, like she's not accepted in that group. When all the women go out in the morning to get water, if she's there with them, she doesn't even want interaction with them. She doesn't want to be kind of like saving face. I guess. She
Yes.
doesn't want to be seen with them. She doesn't want any of that conflict. She's just getting water by herself.
True. Good. So, and that leads me into the second question real quickly, by the way. Can you guys see ways in which these different privileges might be a barrier to shalom? How might, like, let's say the social, the thing that you just brought up, how could that be a barrier to shalom in this situation? Any thoughts? Go ahead. You wanted to comment? Okay.
Just not being accepted, kind of, with, even if whether they're a religious group or a social group and everything.
Yeah.
She's not going to be inclined to, run to their religion or anything, I guess.
Yeah.
Because she's an outcast, and
Yeah.
all the rabbis are saying that she's not clean or anything, so
Yeah.
that's not giving grace in any way.
Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts? Yes.
On the fact that they were like different, so like one was Samaritan and one was a Jew, it almost stopped the interaction between the two because they weren't allowed to interact. And she even asked him like, why are you asking me? Like, you're a Jew.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. The ethnic differences caused a barrier that almost kept them from not even having a conversation. Exactly. That's good. Any other thoughts on any other privileges? Yes.
From the Pharisee side, the pure pride and the fact that they are so unwilling to converse with Samaritans is a huge barrier to shalom.
Yes.
There's no way that you can have a relationship with Christ if you can't have a relationship with your brothers.
Yes. That's excellent. Thank you. I mean, because that happens on a couple levels, right? Ethnically, but also happens theologically. One of the things that's interesting about the Samaritans is that the Samaritans actually believed in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. But they had a little bit of a different Pentateuch than the Jews' Pentateuch. And they completely, by the way, ignored any of the historical books, the prophets, so on and so forth. They were focused just on the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. So you have some theological differences, and because of some of those theological differences, especially from a Jewish perspective, it would keep those folks, right, the Samaritans, from even hearing the message, right? Good. Guys, let's jump ahead. For the sake of time, let's jump ahead to this third question real quickly. You guys are coming up with some great insights here. Let's jump to that last question. Was Jesus privileged? What do you guys think? Yes.
I'm going to say yes and no because he had no food,
Okay.
he had no water, he didn't have a stable home, but at the same time he was a male, which comes with a lot of privilege alone, and the fact that he was a Jew as well.
Mm-hmm.
He was like kind of seen as the higher one in that situation, like the higher ethnic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say he was both yes and no.
Both yes and no. Good. Let me do this. I see a hand here, and then I saw a hand back there. So we can come here and then over there.
Yeah, we were talking about how we saw that Jesus had privilege, and especially being a male and being Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about how Jesus grew up in this culture.
Yes.
And what's amazing is that Jesus was born into this privilege and this mindset of prejudice, but he didn't buy into it. And that
Interesting.
especially like verses 21 through 24, where he's saying, like, yes, there is privilege that has been established, in this case, it's religious,
Mm-hmm.
but Jesus is ushering a new age where that doesn't matter, and that those barriers are being broken down.
Yeah. Good comment. Thank you. I saw another hand towards the back there. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I could be totally off, but thinking of how, like just in this situation, that
Yes.
Jesus told her about her life and
Mhm.
the privilege of knowledge in that sense.
Yes.
Of just being like so on key and like so in tune to like what we would say like without Jesus being here physically, like the Holy Spirit of like just having that I feel like if we were in that situation and just had that knowledge about someone else, how privileged we would be to just be able to tell them of what, just knowing supernaturally.
Yes. Can I real quickly, I just want to jump in because you just hit on something really important. And this is something, let me put it to you this way. Are you guys familiar with the little passage in Philippians 2 that talks about Jesus? Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who, do you guys know what it says after that? Though he was in very nature God. Why was Jesus able to tell this woman all about who she is? Because he was in very nature God. He is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. Did Jesus earn that? No. Jesus is that. Jesus is in very nature God. Is Jesus privileged? Yes. I like the yes and no, because you're right. There are some no's in there as well, right? Wasn't economically privileged, so on and so forth. But there are so many other ways in which Jesus was truly privileged, starting with the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. Something he didn't earn. It's something that was conferred upon him. Why? Because from the beginning, he is. He's the Son of God. That's privilege. He has insight. He has knowledge, so on and so forth, right? So Jesus is definitely privileged, both from an earthly standpoint, being male, being part of the Jewish culture, being sort of a lay rabbi, so on and so forth, all of those different things, socially, everything else. But then also just the fact that even spiritually and theologically, he's the Son of God. Jesus was truly privileged. Let's look at a couple of things real quick. I just wrote down a couple of things that I saw, and you guys have hit on these. The racial and ethnic privilege, the Jew versus the Samaritan thing going on. The gender privilege, man versus woman. Isn't it interesting, by the way, in the man versus woman gender privilege, that when the disciples come back from shopping for groceries and they see Jesus with the woman, they don't say anything, but the first thought in their mind is not, why is he talking to that Samaritan? The first thought in their mind is, why is he talking to that woman? Strong gender privilege going on there. Moral and economic privilege, as we talked about, the whole thing with the 5 husbands that was going on, but really probably some of what was going on behind that is that in order for this woman to survive, she needed to have someone taking care of her because of the way that their society was structured. Social privilege, as you guys mentioned, drawing water at noon, right, instead of at earlier in the day. And then religious privilege, Jewish versus Samaritan religion. So in there, notice that you have, again, many different types of privilege taking place in this passage. And it is part of the social construct, the social system. It's what, as someone said, Jesus was born into this. Jesus was born into this messiness of privilege. But now, what we're going to take a look at is not only the privileges that were there and that Jesus recognized and identified, but we want to take a quick look at how did Jesus overcome those privileges. How did Jesus overcome those privileges? And so we want to take a look at 4 main things. Number 1, Jesus went. Jesus went. The passage tells us in verse 4, now he had to go through Samaria. But it's interesting because, as someone pointed out earlier, quite honestly, in that culture, Jewish people didn't have to go through Samaria. Typically, they went around Samaria, not through Samaria. So in other words, Jesus was intentional in going to a people group that was not like his own people group. Jesus intentionally went into Samaria when he could have gone around Samaria. He went through Samaria because it was something that he had to do. And we're going to get back to that a little bit later, because essentially, when I say it's something he had to do, by the way, if you remember, the disciples come back to Jesus and they're amazed at what Jesus is doing. And they ask him if somebody brought him food. And Jesus said, my food is to do the will of my Father who sent me. Why is Jesus in Samaria? Because God sent him there. Because he had to go through Samaria. But then the second thing, Jesus asked. Jesus asked. Notice that Jesus goes to the woman and asks her for a drink. And it shocks the socks off the woman's feet, basically. She's like, how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink? In other words, Jesus showed some vulnerability. He put himself out there. He demonstrated, look, remember the scripture said that Jesus was parched. I mean, he was just exhausted. He was tired. It was the middle of the day. And so he said, look, I need something. Can you give me a drink? He demonstrated a need for the help of others who were different from himself. Then third thing, Jesus engaged. As he starts this whole thing, he enters into a dialogue with this woman. But I want you to notice this dialogue is truly a dialogue and not a monologue. In other words, it wasn't all one-sided. Jesus shared, but Jesus also listened. He listened to the woman. He listened to what she had to say. He listened even when she started going off on rabbit trails. Notice this wasn't a clean conversation. Do you guys see that? At some point, the woman gets kind of like, yeah, right. Okay, give me this living water that you say you have so I don't have to come back. You know, it's this sort of, all right, yeah, whatever you got to say type of thing. And then at some point, as Jesus is hitting a little bit too close to home, she switches off to another topic. It's not a clean conversation. It's messy. It goes in many different directions. It touches on racial issues. You know, you Jews say that we need to worship in Jerusalem. It touches on religious issues, but we say we got to worship on Mount Gerizim. You know, which one of us is right? It goes through a variety of issues, and Jesus does not give up on the dialogue. But Jesus enters into it. He listens and he shares, and he patiently works through the variety of issues that are brought up by the woman. So he engages this woman. He takes his time to make sure that they enter into dialogue together. So that at the end of the whole process, the woman goes back. She leaves her pot. Notice she never even gets water. She leaves her pot and drops her pots right there at the well, goes back to town, and she says to the folks in the town, come see a man who told me everything about myself. In other words, come see a man who gets me. Come see a man who understands me, who understands where I am, what I'm going through. Now notice, Jesus didn't agree with everything, right? When they got into the theological discussion, and he talked about, well, you Jews say we got to worship in Jerusalem. We say we got to worship at Mount Gerizim. Which one of us is right? Jesus responded by saying, well, hey, we as Jews know the God that we're talking about, but you Samaritans really don't know the God that we know. So in other words, Jesus didn't come along and just agree with everything that the woman said. But then Jesus took it to another level, but he said, but I'm here to tell you that today, that those who worship God will not worship either in Jerusalem or Mount Gerizim. But those who worship God will worship him in spirit and in truth. So the woman, through this dialogue, recognized this is a man who understands me. He understands what I'm going through. He understands my situation, took time to enter into dialogue with me, to listen and to share. Showed vulnerability, showed need. He understands me. Could this man be the Christ? Now, interesting point. We're going to come back a little bit to something that was said earlier, which is the whole point of Jesus and the fact that Jesus, because he's the Son of God, has insight that I don't know about you, but generally I don't have. Right? When I enter into conversations with other people, I can't necessarily sit there and say, okay, go call your husband or go call your wife. Well, no, really, you've had 5 husbands or 5 wives. No, I can't do that, right? Because I don't have that same insight that Jesus has. So while Jesus shows us the method of overcoming privilege, it's good to have somebody that's a little bit closer to who we are. So let me show you exactly and give you a picture of somebody that's similar to who we are. And I think we've got one more handout in the back. We're going to hand that out real quickly. The question is, when it's our turn, what should we do? What should we do? And so I want to look at, just real quickly, we're not going to look at these passages, and you're going to have a handout that has each one of these. So you don't need to write these down. These are coming to you. What should we do? Well, the first thing is we need to go. We need to go. Okay, Acts 1:8, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And Jesus says to his disciples, you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. Jesus says, look, you need to go. You need to go not just to your familiar context in terms of Jerusalem, but also to Judea and then to Samaria, which are people different than you, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. You need to go. I think there's a hand there. And so the question that we need to, there's a couple of things here real quickly. Number one, notice this is a command. This is not a suggestion. Jesus said doesn't say you should go. He said you will go. Okay? That is in the Greek, it's in the imperative, meaning it's a command. So the question that we need to look at is, where do we need to go? Where do we need to go? What is our Samaria? Have we gone to our Samaria yet? The people who are a little bit different than we are. Who might be a little bit different than we are. Where do we need to go? What's our Samaria? What's our uttermost parts of the earth? Where do we need to go? And then even as we talk about that, we probably could add in there the question, why do we need to go? And Jesus gives us the reason why we need to go. The reasons are two. Number one, he commands us. But number two, we're called to be his witnesses. And as we go and reach out to others, we become the witnesses for Jesus Christ. We reflect to the rest of the world what it looks like to be followers of Christ. Second thing is listen. And in this passage in Acts 10, which is where the majority of the rest of this comes from, this is the passage where you see Peter going out to the centurion, okay, the Roman centurion. And so Peter, as he's going out, first of all, Peter is praying, if you remember this passage. A sheet comes down with all sorts of animals, says kill and eat. Voice says kill and eat. Peter says, I can't do that. And the voice says, do not call unclean what I have called clean. And that happens 3 times. And then right after that, he is told by the Lord that some men are coming to meet with you. In other words, Peter was listening to some voices. I'm not just talking about random voices. Peter was listening to some voices. And the question is, what voices do we need to hear? First of all, what is God saying? What is God saying to us? Because Peter heard from God. What is God saying to us? What has God already said to us? Sometimes we're looking for something that's really mystical or spiritual, when many times what God has already said to us is right there in the scriptures. The question is whether or not we're going to listen. So what voices do we need to hear? And then afterwards, as Peter goes and interacts with the centurion and his household, he listens to their story. He listens to what they have to say. So the third thing, observe. What do we need to see? What is it that we need to see that we're not seeing around us? We talked before about invisibility, right? What is that we need to see that we don't currently see going on around us? Peter observed what was happening. Number 4, learn. What is it that we need to understand? What do we need to learn? Peter ended up saying, look, I learned through that experience that I had on the rooftop that I should not keep myself from going to anyone, because God said I should not call anything unclean that which he has called clean. So what is it that we need to learn? What is God trying to teach us? And then the last 4, engage. Where do we need to get more involved? The interesting thing about Peter was that as he went, he engaged with the Roman centurion and with his household. And then afterwards, Peter stayed with them. Do you realize what that means? That he ate what they ate. He slept where they slept. He spent time with them, engaging with them in their culture. And so the question is, where do we need to get more involved? Where do we need to get more engaged and involved with others? Repent and refine. Guess what, guys? We're not going to get it all right. We're not going to be perfect at it. We're going to mess up. In Galatians 2, this is where Paul goes to Peter, because Peter has been going out, spending time with Gentiles, meeting with them. But then as some Jewish believers come, Peter makes a decision to stop hanging out with the Gentile believers, and he goes back to hanging out only with the Jewish believers. And so he segregates himself. And so Paul says, I confronted him to his face because he was wrong in that situation. He was basically creating a barrier to shalom. So the question is, for us, as we go through, recognize we're not going to be perfect. We're going to mess it up. So what actions do we need to change in order to do it right? And then finally, share and encourage. Share and encourage. In other words, Peter went back and he told the folks in Jerusalem what God was doing amongst the Gentiles. And as a result of that, the folks in Jerusalem accepted what God was doing through the Gentiles. So the question that you need to think about, and we need to think about, is who needs to hear what we have to share? After we've done all these other steps, who needs to hear what we have to share? So I'll just leave you with this parting thought here, which is the last point on our slide. And that last point is, what is the next step you need to take? What's the next step you might need to take on your campus? Maybe there's somebody that lives on your floor that you might just need to go and reach out to. Maybe there's somebody that you see in the cafeteria. There might be somebody. I remember when I was in seminary, we had a Black Student Union, and I was the vice president of the Black Student Union. We ended up going over to the Korean Student Union, reaching out to them, and we ended up doing a number of joint events together with our Korean student unions and our Black student unions. What's the next step that you might need to take? Is there possibly somebody that you've already engaged and gotten involved with, but then things start breaking down and you realize that maybe you messed up somewhere and maybe you need to go back and you need to take the step of apologizing and saying, I'm sorry if I offended you, and let me change my behavior in this way so that I don't offend you again. Can I have another opportunity? What's the next step that you need to take? Just want you to think through what the next step might be for you on your campuses and in your environments that you come from. All right?
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.